Welcome to Product Stack Portland. I'm Casey Jones. I run marketing for Notion, and I'm here with my two co-partners, and we're the founding partners for Product Stack. So, welcome. Yay! Applause. So the Product Stack is, and Pivotal Tracker, Ronan with Pivotal Tracker, Andre with Product Plan. So if you have questions about, Notion, Pivotal Tracker, or Product Plan, we're here later. But the Product Stack is a community. It's early stages, but we've been growing for about a year. This is our third event, and it's a community designed to provide practical resources and tips and content and advice for product managers. So like I mentioned, this is our third event. We did one in LA, one in Denver. We've done a bunch of webinars. You guys will get invited to them in the future.
We have your names.
We have your names and your emails. So tonight we're going to be talking about how to align customer feedback with your product strategy. This is obviously a huge issue for every product manager, right? Like, how do you balance the things that your customers are clamoring for and the things that you really believe you should be building or you want to be building or you're planning on building? And we've got a totally kick-ass panel. I will leave it to our moderator who's going to kind of introduce them, and I bet he's going to have the panelists introduce themselves. But I wanted to give a couple words of thanks first. So first and foremost, the godfather of Portland tech, Rick Troisi. No? You don't like that term? What do you want? I don't know. We'll take suggestions later for Rick's new nickname. He has been involved in Portland Tech since Portland Tech really didn't exist, and has his fingers in like growth and startups and accelerators and everything. And I'm sure you guys are all familiar with him, but he's going to be moderating our panel. And also moderating questions from you guys. So we want to encourage, if you have a question, we will have like a dedicated Q&A section at the end. But if you've got like a burning question or something you really want to ask in the middle, raise your hand. We want this to be like a group discussion, and we love sort of involvement. So without further ado, the panel. Woo! Oh, also one last thing. If you guys want to keep the conversation going after this, we do have a Slack community. It's early stages and it's growing rapidly, and we're getting tons of engagement. So just go to theproductstack.com and it'll redirect you and you can get into Slack.
Thank you, Casey. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for coming. And as Casey mentioned, I'm Rick Troisi, co-founder and general manager of Pi. Also write a really grammatically incorrect blog called Silicon Florist. Thank you all for coming. I'm a huge fan of product management and a huge fan of kind of seeing its resurgence. It kind of went dark for a little while. It's nice to see it coming back. I'd like each of our panelists to introduce themselves, just name, role, and then we'll kind of get into questions. As Casey mentioned, please, by all means, interrupt us. I've got plenty of questions for these folks, but we'd love to hear from the audience, so don't be shy, be thinking of questions. Okay, so begin, Heather.
Awesome. My name's Heather. I work for a local tech company that's actually based in San Francisco, but has a pretty significantly sized office here in Portland. My current job role is I'm an account coordinator for our business travel team. But before that, I spent a couple of years, about two and a half years, working on our customer experience team. So my perspective is going to be on working as a member of the support staff and how we have worked with our product team to create internal tools, so an internal product that our customer support team uses globally.
My name is Dan Patsedli. I work at a little company, also SF-based, called Pivotal. I go back to the beginning of that company as it's kind of grown over the years and is now in multiple cities. Not yet Portland, but I'm sure it's any day now. What I do these days is I run Pivotal Tracker as a product, which I guess makes me a product manager. It's more the hats that I wear. I wear a few others, but that's what I do. And I'm really happy to be here, and it's such a great turnout.
Hi there, my name is Greg Goodman. I'm the CEO and founder of Product Plan, which is a product road mapping software. We help companies communicate their product strategy both internally and externally, and I'm based in Santa Barbara.
I think it's on? Yeah. So I'm Kevin Steigerwald. I am head of product and one of the co-founders of Notion here in Portland. We're still a small team, still kind of that startup size. I got into product via advertising, via design, so I'm kind of coming at this whole conversation from that side of, I've worn many hats in many different situations, and working, with customer support on a small team and how you juggle the growing pains of a startup along with everything else product managers have to do.
My name is Pat Chung. I'm a co-founder and head of product for Silversheet. It's an early stage startup. We're venture-backed. I've been there with them for about 4 years. My background is UX design. I've been doing that for about 15 years, and product for about 10 years. Silversheet's a healthcare SaaS app. Not too relevant for today's talk probably, but maybe a little bit more relevant is a side project I'm working on right now. I'm kind of entrepreneur as well, so always dabbling with ideas. And one of the main projects right now I'm dabbling with is called Prod Update, and pretty relevant to the customer feedback product loop.
Thank you, everyone. Variety of sizes of companies that we're dealing with here. I recognize folks from a variety of sizes of companies in the audience. Maybe to provide context for folks, can each of you explain a little bit about how you're capturing and dealing with customer feedback today, whether it's you may be the person who's getting the customer feedback, you may have an established process where you're working with another department. Just kind of give some folks some context about how that works in your organization.
So many mics. So I would say we have a small engineering team here in Portland, and then we also have a couple of product folks here in Portland as well. Also, if anyone's interested, we are hiring a senior product manager. Come see me after. I'm always looking for those referral bonuses. Anyways, so we have a small team here. I'd say probably like under 20 people that are working on building out these tools that our customer support specialists use globally. So we kind of serve as the kind of the breeding ground, so to speak, of any changes that happen for these internal products. So recently, we use Zendesk, and then on top of the Zendesk is what our internal team has created. So that's all of our database information, customer information, things like that. And so our process is we get direct feedback. We do focus groups with customer support agents, and we get their feedback directly. And then some of those customer support agents will actually sit in on more intense focus groups and give more direct feedback, and will actually beta test those products before they get released out into the wild.
I don't know if we're going in order here, but I have the mic, so that means I can talk. And we're also hiring product managers, by the way, just to get that out. Not in Portland, in Denver, actually. So if anybody's interested in a change of scenery, see me afterwards. So feedback, how do we get it? So Pivotal Tracker, for those of you that are not familiar, it's a SaaS application. It's used by a lot of people around the world, startups, teams within larger companies, etc. It sometimes feels like we're just we're drowning in customer feedback, right? So actually this topic of like, how do we make sense of it all? How do we align it with, what we consider to be our product strategy? Like, it's so big for us, and I don't think we have all the answers. So the way we've been doing it is, we also use Zendesk, so a lot of the feedback comes in by email, right? That's pretty typical for any product that has any sort of like email, as a support. People will always ask for things and suggest things. People will tweet about it, like so many channels. We thought it was important to give people a way to provide feedback like in the moment, in context, when they're actually using the product. So we added a widget to our app, which basically is easy to get to. You can just kind of open it up and drop a few words in, which turns into a Zendesk ticket so that we can then follow up and have a conversation. And those are great because people, it's unfiltered. And when somebody's like really passionate about something, like why isn't this working, or like I wish it did this, like they/you don't hesitate to share that, right? And it all just keeps coming at us every day, every hour. I sometimes dream about it. Every room that I go into, as soon as people hear like, oh, that's the pivotal tracker guy, right? It's like every conversation is an opportunity for a feature request, right? So I'm looking forward to this conversation to help us, figure out what to do with it. One thing that we actually do with it is we do pull it into our own product, Pivotal Tracker, which allows us to kind of see some of the patterns, right? Like how do these pieces of feedback cluster? We organize it into, like, we use labels and epics to organize the feedback. So we get a sense of like where the sort of big heat maps are, right? Lots of people are asking about, custom states. A few people have complained about pricing. It gives us a sense of, where the big problems are and opportunities.
Well, as a smaller company, I think, and a newer company, I think we kind of use one of the newer tools. I don't know how familiar you are with Intercom. And so we have a SaaS-based product. It is a SaaS-based product as well, Intercom is, and it's really chat within your application. And since our customers are product managers primarily, we do have marketing and IT people as well, but they're all pretty vocal, and we really love it. And in fact, our customers are amazing because they're very passionate about what they're doing. They're probably doing product at their own companies, and so they're very forgiving about both giving feedback and hearing what you may and may not do with their feedback. And so that's our primary source, which is interesting is that we don't push it into some other formal system. We actually kind of share it with the entire team on Slack, and kind of use that. And then the product manager takes that and kind of filters it into our product features. We tend to do a lot of customer validation stuff. So if one of us sees a conversation on Intercom, we'll immediately engage with the customer or even potential customer about what they're looking for. So if they're asking a question, we might go a little further. And I actually encourage our support people to ask the why part of what they're looking for and what the problem is, and really kind of try to understand it a lot more instead of just what is the thing that they're looking for, or just stopping with the, hey, do you support X? Go a little deeper and like, what would you want us to support if we supported X? And so I think that is a really powerful thing for customer support as well, to really engage the customer a lot more and not have it be just sort of a one-way conversation where somebody's just dropping something in and they don't really hear about it, or you don't even get as much detail as you could if you engage them at the time. And I think that the Intercom tool really helps us do that, where we can engage with them immediately at the time that they're suggesting something.
Yeah, so we use Intercom as well. I think that the points you made are very similar to why we use it. Being able to engage and have that conversation with your customer, instantly is critical for us currently at our size. We tend to stay away from email, more so not even from like the customer's perspective, where it feels like they're just sending something into this, bottomless void where maybe they're going to get response or not. But it's for us. Like when customer emails us, we'll email them back pretty soon, like easily within an hour, and then just they ghost us. Like we never hear back from them, and that's frustrating from our side because we need more detail. We want to understand what they need, and we don't seem to get that with Intercom, right? When it's a chat conversation happening that quickly, we're getting that engagement, and then it's a great way to just build that rapport with your customers. And so we do the same things, though, that Dan's mentioning, though, is Intercom lets you tag things, so we're tagging those conversations with feature requests, and we're able to set up kind of tracking based on that.
Yeah, we use Intercom too, but I won't dive too much into it. I think the only thing I'll add is maybe the human element that we add to it. I think very early on in the beginning of our company, I was obviously there in the beginning, and I think I'd say fifth hire was a director of customer success. I think that's something we thought was really important to be part of the process because we wanted customer success to be critical. So hired someone there. So I think I don't know if you guys, actually, are most people here product managers or a little bit? Well, I think a lot of product managers are kind of taught to get outside of the building and to kind of do customer development and customer research. I think I quickly realized I don't have the capacity to do that on my team, so I think we kind of just built a layer of this customer feedback gathering mechanism, which is customer success people. So I think that's kind of like one of our biggest teams in the company now, like probably besides engineering. So we really value that a lot, and they kind of act as a front line of gathering customer feedback. I think along with that, we also dog food. So our own team, we have a services section too, where we provide professional services to our users using our own products. So the team that uses our own product, yeah, pretty good.
Yeah, I was going to also say too, I think that, you know, from a customer perspective, and also like, again, speaking as we are so like our customer support people are essentially internal customers for our product team that's building this internal tool, and they're going to know how best to do their job, and they're going to know what is going to help them be able to do their job the easiest and quickest and most efficient so that they can take care of their community. And so I think it's super important to listen to your customer support specialists, because they're the ones that are interacting with your customers and your community, and they're going to be the ones that can give you insights into certain things that you might not be able to. As an example, I had the ear of an engineer in our San Francisco office about a feature that was actually on our website. It wasn't our internal tool. And I gave him some feedback about this. And I said, hey, you know, have you thought about, you know, X, Y, and Z on this? And he's like, oh, you know what? I'm going to bring that back to my manager and we're going to take a look at it. And like a month later, the feature got rolled out. And blew me away, for one, because I wasn't used to getting listened to. Because we're a large enough company that the processes can get buried sometimes, but it was really cool that someone actually took the time to listen to what I had to say and respected the fact that I was speaking to our community every day on the phone and via email, and that my opinion and my idea was important. And I think it's just really, really important to remember that your customer support people, they're the ones in the best position to know like what's going on. They kind of have the pulse. And oftentimes they know the product better than you do, because we get so siloed with our engineering teams. They're building different aspects of the product. And so if you're in a larger company, I think that can be a problem too. So listen to your customer support people. Have some fans, apparently.
First, as you can probably tell, and some of us have been doing these panels for a while, and we tend to talk a little too much. So we may not actually get past the first question, okay? But hopefully this will segue into other topics. What I wanted to add to what you just said is that I think one thing that we always forget, especially in companies where we've grown a little bit, you know, there's a bunch of people that we're working with, like we don't really have a system for collecting feedback internally, right? And we don't really make it easy for people to say, hey, I have a great idea, or I think we should solve this problem for our customers, right? And I think it's really important to invest in a way for that feedback to be shared and organized and bubbled up. We almost discount it, even if there is a system. So I think that's something that we really should pay attention to, right? Because we tend to be the more, like we're passionate about our products, and that passion tends to be, you know, throughout the team. So let's create a mechanism for channeling that and acting on it.
Well, and I think that touches on kind of the question of prioritization, and maybe not how do you currently do prioritization, but how do you wish you prioritize product features? Is it just based on volume? Is it based on squeaky wheels? Is it based on what's easiest to implement? What techniques do you use to bubble the right feature set to the top? Yeah, totally. Go ahead.
I was curious if anyone is using analytic tools to clustering or any kind of unstructured data analysis for kind of reasons.
So is anyone using analytics tools to kind of cluster the feedback they're getting and provide some analysis in helping them identify priorities? Is that okay?
I think it's something that we could definitely benefit from. I mean, I know we on our team don't use anything too sophisticated for doing that analysis, and I think if we had like an order of magnitude more feedback, like if we were, you know, a company like Airbnb, I think it's something that would be really interesting to invest in. Going back to your question of, and since I have the mic, I felt compelled to just keep talking.
Go ahead.
How do we make decisions? And this is obviously a big big question, right? Like, wow, so we have all this feedback. How do we decide? And sometimes it's difficult, right? Because there tends to be, well, there's a tendency for us to react strongly to like the last thing that happened or the loudest thing that happened, right? If you happen to be, or if I happen to be talking to somebody in person in this room after this event while drinking beer, right? I'll get really into what you're telling me, and then I'll go back to my team and say, we totally have to go do that, which is not how we should be operating, right? So first, obviously, we want to understand, like, well, what are the problems that our customers are having or our users are having, right? Like, what is it that they're really trying to tell us when they say, I want custom states or I want this button to be blue? Why do they want it to be blue, right? So, and I think it goes back to what you were saying, like, that's the first level of understanding. Then once we have an understanding, we can ask, hey, is that a problem that is in line with our product vision, right? Is this the kind of product that we set out to be? Is this within our space? Because we can get carried away and start going wider and wider, and then you can't really solve anything well if you go too wide, right? So the way we've been trying to sort of organize our process and our thoughts around, you know, what to do next, what is more important is partly how much does it align with our product strategy or product vision, and it's important to actually have a vision, and sometimes it's easy to say, you know, yes, we have a vision, or we all think we have a vision, but like, have we written it down? Have we really crystallized it? Have we made it clear to everyone, including our customers, right? Then there's obviously like cost, right? It's not just engineering cost, but design cost, also ongoing cost, right? Is this something that's going to require ongoing, you know, maintenance and work? Are we going to be happy doing this work on an ongoing basis? And there are definitely tools that help with prioritization. I'll let someone else here speak to that. So trying to make it more objective, and you know, whether it's a spreadsheet or a tool like this, like think about what are the important things to you as a product, as a company, right? If customer retention is important, right? Keeping as many of your existing customers because you're seeing churn rates, you know, that are higher than you'd like them to be, or they're trending in the wrong direction, then let's look at why are customers leaving? What problems did we not solve for them that made them leave? Let's understand that, and then let's make that a heavily weighted dimension in our prioritization process, right? Retention and strategy alignment, and ideally lower costs, right? But what the dimensions are will depend on, you know, what you're trying to do and where you are, I think, in sort of the life cycle of your product.
Yeah. What was our code word for talking too long? No, so I mean, quickly, and Dan, I'll get to your question as part of this too. At Notion, we do a handful of things that maybe we can benefit from because we're small, but I think a company of any size can start to incorporate these things. The first is we try to have as flat and transparent of a roadmap process as possible, so everyone has visibility. We use Product Plan, which is great for this visibility. Everyone has visibility into what we're building, what's on deck. Things shuffle around. Everyone should have visibility and understanding as to why they shuffle around. And so in order to create that understanding, every 2 weeks we have what's called a product party. We call them party because no one would show up to a meeting. There's no party aspect beyond that. But we get the whole team together, and that's why I say like we benefit because we're small. But we have, you know, the CEO is in the same room as the customer support team, and marketing is in the room, and product is in the room, and engineering is in the room, and we're going through things that are on the roadmap or things that have been topical. We pump our intercom, you know, all chat support comes in through Slack, so everyone can at least see the conversations as they're happening, whether they are responding to them or not, right? So everyone's kind of aware of the topics that are happening, but then we have these bi-weekly meetings where everyone gets to voice their opinions, and you know, people who are on sales calls are going to have a very different perspective about whether this next feature really is something that we should be building, or they're going to bring a completely different, you know, solution to the table. And so we try to go into those situations early enough with a feature request or even a feature that we put on the roadmap ourselves, where it's still blank slate enough, right? Where nothing is, you know, nothing's fully specced out. It's not to the point where, okay, here's everything, go build it. It's what's the best way to solve this customer's problem. And Dan, to your question, we track those things. Like I mentioned, we'll tag them as the feature requests come up in Intercom, and we actually pump that data back into our product, Notion, and we're able to kind of see those trends. And so if we are talking about feature X, Maybe customers want to upload avatars, right? They want to upload images for their avatars, and that seems like a very topical thing because 3 people asked for it this week. We can go back to the data and say, well, no one has asked for that feature in 6 months. And so is that really the most topical thing that we should be building? Or does it make sense to watch the trend lines for a couple more weeks before tackling it?
How do you, so we've talked a little bit about prioritization and all the feedback. How do you deal with letting customers down gently, or features that are being pushed, or the kind of things where specifically for early stage startups, those can be sometimes the difference between life and death? Like, how do you deal with the customer base where you can't satisfy their feature request?
So I think the key thing there is communication and sharing what your thought process is. And I'll go through a quick example for us. And I think a lot of it has to do with your vision, which Dan was mentioning. And you really need to have a clear vision of where you're going and what your customers want. It also depends on what stage you're at. If you're really kind of in the rough startup phase, you should probably be listening really closely to what your customers want until you have good market fit with your product. So if you're in that stage, then I think your customer requests are probably really, really important, and you might want to be listening to those a lot closer. For our product, we're a product road mapping software, and so when our customers start asking us for more project management kind of features, so one of them was dates. Early on, we were asked to, like, we want to have dates on our product roadmap, and we're like, dates? Like, we don't want you to talk about dates. Like, this is strategy. It's not like which day is it delivered. And so we do have a dates feature, but it's kind of hidden. So we kind of caved to that a little bit, but not too much. And then we also had another example of that with dependencies. They were like, we want dependencies. Why don't we have Gantt charts with lines going between things? And we were like, ugh, it made our skin crawl. And so we're coming out with a feature that's sort of like dependencies, but it's not really dependencies. It'll be more called connections and allow you to show kind of what things are related to what other things. And so we feel like that's really more aligned with our vision. And when we talk to our customers about it and explain that trade-off of, like, here's what you're asking for, and here's what we would consider, and sometimes you actually have to tell them no. Like, this is not an area we're ever going to go to. You may need a different product, or it's just you're not going to get it from us. So that's why we partner with some of these other companies who do really good things, either in project or analytics or other areas that we may never do. So that's why we need to make our product fit with other products and have an API and do integrations with other tools so that you can have a full suite of solution.
I have an example of saying no. Right, and we've been saying no to this for years. So our product is it's a team-oriented project management collaboration software. Obviously, it's for teams working together. We really value sort of the team aspect of it over a situation where you have a manager managing individuals and their tasks. We think that's hard, so we're like, no, just make your priorities clear and work as a team cross-functionally, right? Don't worry about like who's doing what exactly. It's more about making things clear. So our product also sort of measures the team's velocity, which is essentially like how much you're getting down on a per week basis. So we can kind of like predict the future for you based on that sort of cadence at steady state. That's really all it's for. So we get a lot of feedback, a lot of requests for per developer velocity reporting, of course, right? How many points did this developer deliver this week versus that developer, right? And, we always kind of look at that and go, why do you want to know that, right? I mean, not to be like skeptical about it. Like sometimes like you just have to know because of the nature of the team or the situation. But it's not something that aligns with our vision, right? Because if we go down that road, and yes, lots of customers wanted, lots of enterprise customers wanted, they will pay more money for it, but we think it would jeopardize our sort of, the product vision, and it might lead to people sort of treating velocity and thinking about it differently, right? You start gaming it, you start maybe picking up the stories with a bigger point so that you would get bigger claim to the delivered velocity, and that's not what we want. We want it to be collaborative. We want it to be, just people working together trying to get the product done. So we say no, but the no is not enough. It has to be visible. So we even have like a blog post about why measuring per developer productivity can lead to bad things? And have you thought about organizing things in a way where the team really works together more rather than people just kind of in their own little silos being handed work and therefore have to be measured, right? So I think my last point there is that these no's can be an opportunity to have a conversation, to ask questions, and maybe reframe the problem and get people to think about, hey, maybe there's a better way to work. And that is something that is within our kind of, I think, scope or mission, as we like to call it. Like, we want to change how people work. So for us, the no is really an opportunity to get people to think about it differently.
You touched on it a couple times. I just wanted to kind of delve into it a little bit. How can you tell when something is a symptom of a deeper problem or is actually a problem in and of itself? Like how do you dive into that and kind of unpack that when you're dealing with customers who are just like, I just want this to work the way I want it to work? Like, are there techniques for doing that? Do you have teams that are skilled at doing that? Anybody have any strategies for dealing with that kind of stuff?
I think the key is asking about what the problem is and not what the features they're trying to build. So, what is the pain point that they have? Where is the fly in the ointment? What is causing the tension, the friction, that they need to have? So, if they're asking for something, it's like, well, so why do you want to do that? I think if you keep asking the why question, that helps a lot in terms of like really understanding deeper what's going on. And I think you need to do that more collectively too. I don't think you can just take one person's true opinion about it all the time. And this is an example of that. I know one startup that their strategy was they'd put Post-it notes up on this whiteboard, and they would prioritize them. And the upper left was the things that they wanted to work on, and everything to the right was stuff that they weren't ready to do anything with. And every 6 months, they would clear off the whiteboard entirely and throw them all out. And the thought was that if it was important, it would come up again. And I think that's a really important lesson to remember is like, at any moment in time, you might be hearing something, but it's only that moment in time, and until you hear it regularly over a longer period of time, is it important enough for you to probably spend a lot of time on it? So that would probably be another strategy for that.
Yeah, specifically for Pat and Heather, a lot of us deal with technical folks making requests on our product. Like, how is it different, or how do you have techniques for dealing with folks who might not be? It might be a physician using the product, or might be a homeowner using the product. Like, how do you deal with that?
And I would say that like our customer support folks aren't technical either. Like they're there to help people when things go sideways, and they need to be able to have tools that will help them get the job done. And so I actually came to Airbnb from healthcare, and one of the things that's been most exciting to me about working in tech is how actually easy it is to get things changed and done, because healthcare is not like that at all. I keep on praying for a startup that's just going to disrupt the heck out of healthcare and like change the world. And so for me to like not have a technical background but still have my opinion be respected has been great. But one of the things that I've enjoyed also is just learning about how the technical side of things works. So like I'm taking coding classes, and it's helping me understand a little bit more what the process is. So that way when a product person is like, yeah, no, that's not going to happen, I kind of understand why. But I also I love when they challenge me too. They're like, well, why do you need that? Like, why do you need that feature? Like, what are you using that for? And so like when we were doing the initial they came to us with like 3 or 4 different ideas. There was a small group of us from different parts of customer service. And so we have people that work in payments and trust and safety and working with trip tickets and non-trip tickets and things like that. And so we had a whole group of people that came together, met for an entire day of meetings, and we had Post-it notes and whiteboards, and we went through this whole process of like what are the things that we want that we don't have right now that will help us do our job better. And then they came back at us a couple months later with more of a mock-up of what it was going to look like. And then a couple months after that, they gave us access to the beta test. So people were beta testing it for probably like 3 or 4 months. And then we finally have done like a pilot rollout here in Portland, and then we've been slowly launching at our other sites globally. And so I think, I don't know if I'm answering your question, but I think that even if you don't have a technical background necessarily, I still think that you can give really good feedback. And in some ways, the feedback isn't as skewed as it would be if you knew a lot more about things, because you can be more creative with like your solutions. So like I'm always like thinking about like ways that we can make the product better. And so like one of the things that I want to do, and we started a competition. It's called the Hunger Games because we do all this air stuff, and I have, even though I'm no longer working tickets, one of my biggest pet peeves is we have this feature on our internal tool where we can see what the reservation looked like at the time of booking. So we know all the details, like what the price was, all the amenities, all of those kinds of things, and its appearance is as if someone just took like some JavaScript like objects and IDs and classes and stuff and just kind of threw them in there with a little bit of CSS and HTML mixed in, and it's really hard to find information. So I submitted an idea like, let's clean that up. Like, let's figure out what's important to a CX agent so that they don't have to spend 20 minutes trying to go through all of this data that's kind of irrelevant. So my idea got in the top 5. We'll see if I make the top 3, but I've been asking for this for 3 years. It hasn't been a priority for our product team because there's other things that they need to do, and that makes perfect sense to me. Like, I totally get it. Like, the amount of time people use that tool is probably very minimal, but man, if we can get that fixed, it's gonna help people be able to do their job more efficiently. So, yeah.
I think for us, we're pretty lucky having non-technical users because I think they're actually a lot more forgiving. It's probably pretty cliche, but they just want to be heard and just kind of want to have some kind of semblance of an answer. So, we're still a pretty small team, pretty early stage, still trying to find product market fit in some respects. So, sometimes this might sound laughable, but I'll just say Q4, how does that sound? And it's surprising. It's kind of like the effect that they just know they're heard and they know you're working on it, and because they don't really know the level of effort, they're sort of okay with it and they kind of plan accordingly. I tend to use pretty simplistic frameworks. That's just how my simple brain works. So we use Trello a lot for feedback tracking, and we have like this pretty elaborate Kanban board, to tell you the truth. But there's this really cool feature on Trello. I don't know if you've ever seen it, but it's this antique paper. Has anyone seen it, or no one's used it? But it's really funny. But basically, if you leave a ticket around long enough, it just starts looking like old pirate paper. So it's actually a really good tell because we have all these people. They could be really non-technical, and intercom they're like screaming, right? They're like typing all caps because they have no idea what caps locked is. And, we get one gal who does that all the time, actually, every day. And we log the tickets. We do our part, and then these unless it's revenue driven, kind of going back to the prior conversation of how we prioritize, very simple frameworks. Is it revenue driven? Is it new business or old business that we're trying to save? If it doesn't fall into like revenue or product strategy, then we try to just hold off as long as possible because we have limited resources. So we tend to use this old paper technique quite a bit. And oftentimes they'll kind of forget. And I can't remember who said earlier that, if it comes up again that more and more people are asking for it, then of course we'll say yes. There's probably something we need to productize. But if only 1 or 2 are just asking for it, and we already did the due diligence of saying no, I mean, this is not, don't take my advice, but like, sometimes you ignore it and it kind of goes away. Or sometimes you kind of give them, I don't know, I guess we give them a little inkling of like when it might come out in the queues. It tends to alleviate a lot of grumpy customers, I think.
Just a quick thing. For a while, just on this topic of non-technical versus technical audiences and the kind of feedback you get, for a long while, we were mistook for another product So we're like, our audience is, software teams, developers, product managers, etc. And so we're used to a certain level of communication from our customers that we really appreciate, right? And it makes it a lot easier to show empathy and to really understand the problem because they share a lot more of the underlying problem. But for a while, we were mistook for a different kind of product, a consumer product, a really cheap, crappy $10 one that was like intentionally launched to be a crappy product and give people a horrible experience. And because of a similar name, in fact, I think it was in Portland that they were launched. Maybe it was Seattle. No, I think Seattle. I blame Seattle. So for a long time, people were signing up for our product thinking that it's for their crappy, actually it was more like $5 Fitbit, knockoff, right? And the kind of feedback and communication that we started receiving was just like, wow. And this is what, if you're launching a low-cost consumer product, this is the kind of feedback you're gonna get. Like all caps, all swearing, right? Like you can't make sense of it. Scary stuff. I don't know how you can maintain a certain level of empathy, right? And engagement with this kind of feedback. So I'll just leave it at that. But I think empathy is a word that we haven't used yet, and I feel like it's something that's an important part of, listening and showing it, right? And if you can show empathy, I think people will be a lot more willing to understand that, maybe it's not something you can tackle today, but you really understand the problem, you've internalized it, and it's not something that you just, heard and forgot about right away.
So yeah, I was totally going to use the word empathy in my answer. Thanks, Dan. But no, I wanted to come back to something that Heather said, where coming at it from her side, where she's trying to learn more of the tech angle, helps her to be able to answer those questions, because and maybe I'm summarizing too much here, but by knowing how and what it takes to build something, you're able to better answer that kind of question on the spot without, well, let me go back and come up with a bullshit answer before I have to go talk to dev and product team to see, is this even something we can feasibly do? I think it works the other angle the other way as well, where if you can get your developers to empathize, as Dan says, but if you can get them to work customer support or get them as close to that process as you can, remove as many layers, because empathy, just like anything else with a feature request, it becomes a game of telephone, where every layer that it goes through the process and the channels, you lose that by the time it gets to the developers. And half the time they may just get a list of specs, and they say, oh, I can build this a completely different way in a week's time, and they'll rattle it off, and yes, it checks all the boxes, it works. But then it gets back in the hands of the customers, and it doesn't do at all what they were actually trying to do. And so if you can get that, your development team to empathize, they can sometimes come up with those solutions as well.
I would say also, for not just our internal tools, but also for our actual product, we do have. We've made a lot of inroads over, I'd say, the last year, where we now have product teams. So it'll be product and engineering teams will actually come up to Portland, and they will sit in on calls. They will watch the agents work, and then they get a chance to kind of hear what the customers are saying and what those pain points are. And if anything, I think it does help them get a little bit more empathy, because they see what we're exposed to every day from our community, and they get to hear the community sharing that, sometimes very vocally, sometimes not. And I think that's probably one of the best things you can do. We have a saying, also about eating the dog food, and so it's really interesting when someone who doesn't work CX or customer experience, they go on a trip and they have a bad trip. And then they have to experience what that's like going through the customer support cycle, and what that looks like. And so I think it's super, super important to eat the dog food, so that you can also have that empathy for not only your the people that are doing customer support, but also understand what the user experience can be sometimes, and how the changes that you're making in the product can affect that user experience. So
Cool. Speaking of empathy, got questions. Okay, just they're back there, and then we'll go here.
So, how do you support that cycle? Because embedding a developer within a team or a group or a customer doesn't seem to be fruitful on its own. So I would assume you would need a support system in order to do that. Is that feedback and cycle that in an appropriate way. Developers are very single-minded enough with that. So you tell them a feature, they'll develop it, but it's kind of hard to interpret that pain point you described. So how is it that you guys go about doing that?
Yeah, so I'll answer it quick just from a small team size. And again, sometimes the benefits of being smaller, a lot of these things are easy and maybe don't scale as well. But we work in 2-week sprints, and every sprint will have a new sprint captain. And the sprint captain's responsibility for those 2 weeks are customer support, right? And so they still have their standard dev tickets, but when they estimate, they are going in knowing I'm going to have some of my time devoted to customer support. Sometimes no support comes up that week. Sometimes a lot does, and their features don't get done. And so from the product side, we have to anticipate that as well, and just setting that tone and message early on that we're all in this together. If I understand that you're the captain this week, so if your feature doesn't get deployed, that's the risk we're taking. But it has to be kind of like agreed upon by everyone, as opposed to just shoveling someone in and saying good luck.
I think the systems that we set up, once again, pretty simple. Product has a bi-weekly meeting with CS like every other week, so we know exactly what their pain points are. And, it's like one step removed, but it's pretty close to the metal there. And for devs, our mechanism there is we route every intercom message through a channel that the devs kind of look in on, and they see when CS is screaming like we're already a step ahead, like we already see the same complaints, and so that's how we kind of just keep a finger on the pulse, I guess.
I think sometimes it's interesting to shatter some of these assumptions, like developers are sort of single focused and they only care about the next story you give them, right? And I think it's about creating a system where there is an opportunity for them to get involved, right? Either just through directly seeing all the feedback and putting it in Slack or somewhere where it's very visible. Personas are sometimes overlooked as a tool for allowing people to emphasize and internalize or relate to like the customers and the people that are using your product, right? And that's why sometimes even some of these workshops that you do, ideally with like the whole team or developers and designers and domain experts, you start with drawing faces and pictures of people, and you give them a name, and you think about their hobbies and where they live and where they went to school, right? It's kind of fake, but it actually does sort of reframe a little bit how people think about the problem, and then ultimately, like, we're just here, we're a team trying to solve their problem, so as a product manager, yes, it's our job to bring them as close as we can, given the constraints, to the person that you're solving a problem for.
I had a couple of things on it that I'll try to make real quick. One is Nps Scores. So I don't know if you're familiar with Nps. It's the ultimate question, the 1 through 10 question. Will you recommend this product to someone? And then they can put that number in, but then very next thing is why. And so they usually put some comments there. So when we do our NPS rankings, we consolidate all that information and we share it with the entire team. And I've never seen our dev team move any faster than when they saw customer feedback that said something was wrong with our product. So that's a really effective way of getting them fired up about improving things. The other one that we do is on our planning meeting, we do a lot of discussion about why we're doing this. And so our product manager includes kind of the customer information that they've gathered in their interviews and include that in it. And then the last thing that we share with all our developers is our cancellation information. So when anyone cancels, we ask them why, and we gather that information and share it with all of our developers as well. So I think a lot of it is really around sharing of the information.
I had a question to the point about prioritizing trouble tickets or whatever, or feedback based on revenue generation or retention. So like many of you, we're overwhelmed with customer feedback and trying to figure out how to prioritize it. And almost just out of exasperation, we started saying to people, trying not to say it in a mean way, but like, would you pay $1 a month more for whatever you're asking? Or would you pay $200? Is this worth any money to you at all? And that sort of unlocked a new gear for our whole company in terms of we have our vision of where we want to go, right? We're not going to let people pay to pull us off track. But if we have a customer, and this is like a real example, they wanted something that we thought was kind of stupid, candidly. And, and I did the thing. We're still small enough. I know a lot of our customers personally, so I could soften this and be like, hey, we're kind of busy, and how much more would you pay for this? And they kind of thought about it, came back and said $200 a month on a product that like our average revenue per user is like $500. And we're like, wow, that's a game changer, and really like turned our company. And so the next discussion between me and our team was, well, can we just add like a little decision tree on feedback that's like, is this like a support issue? Okay, go this way. Is this a feature request? Go this way. And then have a little thing that says, how much more would you pay for this? And people reacted to me like I was Hitler, that I would dare challenge our beloved customers to pay like even 1 penny more for stuff. And so part of why I'm here is to get feedback from professionals about like, is that ridiculous? What are the dangers of doing that maybe I'm not aware of? Or like just your feedback on forcing or at least making people think about it to separate their wants and their needs, and then also helping educate all tech consumers that like what we do is valuable and expensive, because I feel like a lot of people are kind of anchored at that all tech products should be $1 for the app, and that's just ultimately, as we're not able to consistently raise endless venture capital, we're going to have to learn how to charge people more. So I'm interested in all of your feedback to that to the extent we have time. Thank you.
Yeah, so I'll say real quick, if it works, it's genius. Because it is, right? More money is part of the process. But to the risks, what's that? Worked once. Okay, so that's the risk, right? The risk is, even if it works that one time, and it could be 500 to 200 is a significant jump, but maybe it's 500 to 5,000. Right? But if it's still only going to work one time, what does that mean to the rest of your product vision? What did you just build that your team now has to support, that your team has to potentially market, that your team has to say, this is now part of our product that only one customer wants, right? And so the risk is, before you can even promise that to the customer, say we're going to pay for it, is make sure everyone is aligned and that continues on the path of the product that you are building.
So there's quite a few ways of doing prioritization. Our product actually has one way that like revenue versus or feature versus benefit, So benefit versus cost is what I really was trying to say. Apologize. And it allows you to score things. So we like to try to take the subjectivity out of things and put it into more of an objective discussion about like, well, why do you think this is going to move revenue, especially in internal discussions. For external discussions with customers, I think that's a great strategy. You can also use, you have $100, how do you want to spend it? You can spend it on these things. How do you want to allocate that $100? That's another strategy for doing that if they have a lot of requests. Internal requests, I know my marketing team comes to me and says, here's all the things we need to get done. And I say, would you prioritize that list for me? So, I think those are all, getting them to help make the decision, I think is a big part of it. And that's sort of what you were using to do that.
Yeah, I agree that putting some constraints around it is really a good way of doing it, because it forces you to think about relative priorities, and that's true for even like your own team. Everybody's advocating for this and that because of what you just had a conversation about, or like the last support ticket that you looked at, right? It's like, okay, well, I'll give you, 10 points or something, or like you get to pick 10 things or 3, right? Would it be in the top 3? No, probably not. As far as like whether it's, I don't know, ethical or moral to ask your customers whether they would actually pay for a certain feature, I mean, what the hell, why not, right? But the question is though, will they actually, right? Like the whole sort of classic Starbucks example before Starbucks came around, it's like, would you pay $3 for a coffee? It's like, no, right? But now we all do. Would you pay $1,000 for a phone? No, but you're about to. And also, like, depending on the kind of product that you sell, like if it's a sort of more of a B2B, or like it's sort of businesses that are buying it, right? The user versus the buyer are two different people, right? And so a user might say, sure, I'll pay sure, because it's not my money, right? Will our buyer, will our procurement, team or whatever be okay with paying for this? So you kind of have to unpack it a little bit depending on the situation.
Can you guys hear me without the mic?
No, yes, we can.
Good hustle. First, just a quick comment, then a quick question. So Heather, besides being a product geek, I'm also an Airbnb host, and I wanted to talk to your point of getting outside the building for CX. So my wife and I, who run this unit here, we had the holy trinity of a product manager, dev lead, and UX person visit us about 6 months ago to ask us about how we manage about our unit. I thought that was awesome. It became pretty clear quickly that the things they were talking about wouldn't help us. So I have no expectation that what we told them will result in something in the product, but I was amazed and impressed that they spent 2 hours out of their lives, because that's expensive, right, to go out and talk with your customers. So that made my loyalty even deeper. So kudos to anybody who does that, to get out there in the field. My question is, you guys have been talking about various mechanisms for capturing feedback, but often the customers won't communicate with you except by abandoning or by swiping through and clicking things. So besides the explicit feedback you're capturing through email and other, what kind of engagement tools and customer journey tools are you using for those customers who will never actually communicate with you in any other way? Thank you.
And silence.
I feel like I go first every time. That is a great question. So we do a couple things. One, we have like mixed panel set up, and it's difficult, right? Like setting up mixed panel is not the solution. It's the tool, and so you have to kind of have your plan going into every feature release or every target, every goal that you have set. You need to set your benchmarks as a team, because again, new feature rolls out, 25% of the users have adopted it. Is that good or bad? Well, we didn't say before we released it, so we don't know. And it's not even just saying before you release it, but like trying to have some data to support that. Well, the last feature we rolled out, or we have X number of customers asking for it, so we expect a certain number of user adoption, right? However and wherever you can set those goals ahead of time, you're gonna benefit from. But then, it's digging through, making sure that you're instrumenting it the right way. Again, this is where being a small team is a negative, where we can roll through features pretty quickly and get them out the door, but they're not then always instrumented to track, right? Because that's the things that kind of will slow us down. And so building that into the process and making sure that everyone is on that same page of, just because we shipped it doesn't mean we can instantly grab the next ticket for the next feature. Let's make sure that the thing that we just shipped is actually going to work, and that means setting up mixed panel, making sure that the flow is working the right way.
I'm always surprised about how willing people are to share feedback when you ask them, right? I mean, even just like surveys, like sounds really boring and old-fashioned, but and we haven't done it in a while. But every time we do, just send out, a nice email, and like we found that the fewer words you use in the email that you send out to solicit feedback or ask people to fill out a survey, like the better the response is. So we've really like kind of trimmed it down to like literally a sentence, and using certain words like I forget where we learned, but things like, please, for sure, please. Like, we ended up doing a test with a bunch of different, like, subject lines, and I think the words, like, mean the world to us, like, things like that did really well, or, like, much better than others, right? So just because it kind of just shows, like, look, we're I don't know whether it's, like, we're begging or we're more human because we use certain words like this, but fewer words. And I was always amazed by the number of, like, what percentage of people open this email and what percentage actually bother to fill out the survey. Like, every time we have the surveys coming in, it's like, oh my God, people are like, don't they have better things to do than to fill out all these, like, questions? But, like, they do, and you get this, like, really sort of qualitative, like, especially the free-form answers, like, just tell us whatever else, right? Like, there's, the NPS, and there's a few other, like, what problems would you like us to solve, like, choose from these 10, and then there's, like, a free-form, like, and tell us something else, and, like, and they do. And it's amazing, right? Like, they'll just share so much, and it might not be like 50% or whatever of the responded, and you're not going to send this out to like all your users because you don't want to like blow it all and, and not be able to do it again for a while. But it's representative. If you get enough people to open this, enough people to fill it out, right? Like maybe it's 10% of your customers are active customers, but there are always patterns, right? And I think you can rely on those patterns being pretty consistent. So for us, surveys have actually been pretty good at getting that kind of feedback proactively from people that might not have otherwise chosen to give us that feedback.
One of the tools that you may have heard of is user voice. Allows you to kind of capture a bunch of users to kind of upvote different features and things. That might be one. I did want to make a second comment on the interviews that you had. It is really expensive to send people out in the field. I would also encourage people just to use Google Hangouts, WebEx, GoToMeeting. Anything you can do where you can get face-to-face with your customer is extremely valuable. So yeah, if you can afford to send people out into the field, that's fantastic. But even if you can just do it that way, just with a video conference is a fantastic way of getting great customer feedback. And I would encourage that actually more than surveys. I think it has you can go a lot deeper, you can get a lot more valuable information that way than I think generally through surveys.
Software companies. I'm going to just yell. It's all right. It's from.
You're on the spot.
So I've been in a number of software companies where we wave the flag of, oh yeah, that's a great feature request. Let me get that to our product team, and we'll definitely make it happen. And I think being in sales and onboarding and all go-to-market functions, I'm frustrated by the fact that not enough business development actually comes from customer success, and not enough of these salient, really poignant ideas of how the product can get better is being looked at by business development. And I kind of would like, instead of like talking about the negative, I'd rather ask you, like, do you have examples where you found a nugget of gold because of customer success and because of the team and people and the questions you were asking that turned into a business development story?
I can't think of a specific example of the nugget that turns into something huge, but we do use our customer success teams to run stuff by them a lot. So I'll go by and I'll talk to them about our priorities, and I'll say, if we're going to do an integration with Trello, or we're going to do an integration with GitHub, or what do you think is the highest priority from what you're hearing from customers? So I'll definitely go to customer success and ask them their opinions and how they would prioritize things. I also get their feedback pretty regularly, what they think their top 5 are, type of stuff. I can't think of a specific massive example, but I think they're a huge part of the team that you should be leveraging.
Maybe I'll answer 2 questions at once, just the one before 2. I think besides software tools that we use for when a customer actually churns and exits, I think that's also one of the most prime times to get user feedback is when they actually churn and kind of understanding why they're doing it. So, I think I've said this a couple of times, that we use customer success a lot in our product development. So even there is probably one of the most insightful times because you never know when people are kind of just threatening to churn or if they're going to churn. So when they actually pull the trigger and churn, that's when we, put a human being there, because not only is that so important because, a lot of our industry is about referral, and I would think that's what Nps Score, that's the whole spirit of Nps, is whether someone's going to promote your product. It's kind of like, when you go to a restaurant and you have horrible service, and at the end of the day, the waiter or waitress says, well, have a great day, it was nice meeting you or something, and then, you still tip them. Or at least I do. I get fooled by that every time. I'm like, that's actually a pretty nice person. Kind of maybe on that same token that, even though they might have had a horrible experience, I think put a human being there kind of at the end to kind of see them off versus an attitude where it's don't let the door hit you on your way out type thing is pretty important. And I think, I don't know if this answers your question, but that could be one of the most poignant feedbacks that we then bring back the product and go, people are churning because of this reason. Could we productize the solution for them? And
sometimes there's frustration from the customer success / support side, right? Because they might be really close to these problems that customers are having, and they feel like they take it to the PMs or the product team or whatever, and then nothing happens, right? It's why did nothing happen? I think part of that's there's no feedback loop. And sometimes it's like hard to think about, well, how do we give them the feedback loop? Like it sometimes isn't a conversation in the context of like this one request, but it's all this relative prioritization thing that happens somewhere in secret by the product team. And we're a little bit guilty of that. We're trying to sort of work through that as a team, right? Because we get so much feedback, and our customer support / success team is so passionate about, you know, all the things, right? But then they'll come to us and then like, we'll say, cool, thanks, we'll, you know, think about it, and then like nothing happens, right? So one of the things that we've been trying to do lately is like sort of just surface like how we make decisions around what we're going to focus on, what we're not going to focus on, and why, right? And make sure that their feedback is sort of bubbling up in that. So if they're saying, hey, we keep getting requests, our pricing sucks, people are complaining about our pricing, fine. And so why are we not fixing pricing, right? So if we put it, you know, in some sort of a more objective, more transparent form, whether it's, you know, using Product Plan's planning board or a spreadsheet where we say, okay, well, here's all the 50 things that you've been asking us to do, right? Not you as in you, the support team, but like that people have been asking us to solve for them, right? We've got some dimensions, right? We'll do our best to rank these things in terms of these different dimensions, like will it reduce churn, right? Will it lead to more revenue, right? Is this going to make our product, you know, more delightful, blah, blah, blah. So we say, okay, well, let's talk about pricing. You want to talk about pricing. Let's see where it is on the list. Oh, it's not on the list. Okay, let's put it on the list. How would you rank pricing in terms of these dimensions, right? And then let's see what happens, right? Oh, look, it's like number 47. At least based on our best guess as to what the impact will be and the cost. And then it's like, oh, you're right, we probably shouldn't tackle that because it's number 47, not number 2, right? How come we're not focusing on number 2? We are focusing on number 2. Okay, great, right? So even that as a system, or having a system in place to kind of help with that conversation, I hope makes people feel a little bit more, I don't know, settled, like we're listening and we're trying to make decisions more objectively rather than like, who knows what happens, and maybe one day they'll finally get to it. And I think we're just, like, it's hard to know that this is important until you're like really there and you're suffering because there's a lot of tension around this, right? And that's, so I can sort of relate to this, but maybe from the other direction.
Okay, we've got time for one more. I saw a couple of hands. Yeah, right here.
As the company grows, I guess customer service and customer feedback changes quite a bit, going from maybe a startup where you're trying to find product market fit to a larger company like Airbnb where you're doing a lot of different changes to make the user experience better. Can you talk about the differences and then the actual transition? Because I think there's a point where it actually changes dramatically, and I wanted to hear about that change.
I was going to say, I can't really speak to that, unfortunately, just because it is interesting. We still do see ourselves as a startup, and I know that's kind of silly because we're so big. But in many ways, our culture is still very much a startup culture. And so I can't really speak directly to that as far as like the growth and like how we've scaled necessarily. I can say like from a CX customer experience perspective, I've been with the company for 3.5 years, and we have scaled tremendously. Like our CX organization has probably tripled in size. But our community has also grown significantly too. And even like 3 years ago, people didn't know what Airbnb was. And now it's almost the exact opposite. I very rarely come across people who have never heard of us. Most everyone I come across has heard of us. So that's about all I can speak to about that, just because it's a little bit outside my wheelhouse. So,
I'll add to that from the small side. I think your biggest transition points are when you go from 1 to 2, and then when you go from many to those many having a boss, right? So 1 to 2 is if you have one person on your team, they're doing everything, they know everything, they have their own process. Second person comes in, and it's like, oh shit, I didn't document anything for you. We should probably figure this out together, right? And so like, it's that knowledge share has to happen. And so to plan for that, it has to be like set those processes up as early as you can. Even though you are only maybe be the only person on the team, get in a rhythm, document things. You'll be much happier for it. And then it's that same thing when, when you get a boss, meaning like maybe you're now hiring like a senior or a team lead, right? And so now instead of, the CEO or the head of product kind of overseeing customer support as well, it's like we've hired a VP of customer support, right? Because that's typically not the first hire that a startup is going to make. So that's then another big transition point where, okay, you guys have all been doing your own thing, or, oh, great, you have your process, but I thought I was going to come in and define the process for you, right? So it's like that becomes a conflict, potential conflict, or at least a touch point where you kind of got to get everyone on the same page. And so, yeah, those would be the big ones.
I think one thing that tends to happen as you go from, little tiny company to slightly bigger tiny company, and so on, is you sort of get more and more isolated, or you start moving further and further away from like the customers or the people that you're actually, trying to solve problems for, right? Now there's like layers. There's like first level of support, second level of support, and eventually the engineering team gets involved and the product managers, right? And it's like, well, what's wrong with that? I mean, then you have like too many layers of communication. Things get lost in the translation, right? You feel disconnected from anything and everything. Now you start, I don't know, just dreaming about re-architecting your code base or something, right? Like you're so far removed from the problem. And so I think one thing that's being recognized more and more, and especially in larger companies, is sort of going back to the roots of, or maybe thinking about how startups operate and like organizing like a collection of startups, and or at least like small teams that are close to their customer and they can focus on specific customer problems, be able to solve those problems, not like one little piece of a problem, but like the whole problem, right? And be able to ship and deliver directly to the customer. So a lot of the bigger companies that Pivotal's working for are actually trying to transform themselves into more of a kind of like a startup organization where it's like a bunch of small teams, but each team is focused on some vertical problem, right? And isn't constrained by like this code base or that code base or this product or that product. It's about solving customer problems and being close to those problems and being able to solve those problems for the customer directly.
See something. This problem is kind of like pretty close to me right now. Kind of painful because we're kind of going through it right now, where I think we built a V1 in these last couple of years, and it's our software. It's kind of in software development terms, it's called a monolith. It's just huge. This huge code base that does a lot, and because it has to do a lot in the world that we play in. And it's no fun, actually. It's no fun for the users, too. And it hurts me because I'm a user experience designer by trade. But I think over the past couple of years, I had to wear the product designer hat. So like whenever I introduce myself a lot now, I say I'm a product designer because I can't even do justice to the word user experience designer because the user experience is so horrible. And we've been sort of, just building feature after feature to sort of accommodate the user story. So I could say, can the user do X, Y, Z? I could say X, Y, like A to Z, and then some. They could do a lot, but can they do it in a very sort of happy way? I can't say that, and we haven't been really focusing on that. We've been kind of focusing. So to your question, like, is there a point where you focus on that? And I think we're at that point. I don't know how other companies deal with it, but I think the sort of the North Star indicator for me as we're kind of turning this chapter right now is the NPS score, actually. A couple of people said it before, I think I might have said it already too, that is a really good indicator, I think to me, of all sorts of things. One thing is happiness, obviously, but like product market fit and all that stuff too. So I think that, I don't know if it's an answer because we're in that tipping point right now where we're looking a lot at user experience, and it's like, sure, our product could do everything, a lot of what the user needs to do, but are they happy? As a product manager, I have this other sort of touchstone thing. Does my product? I don't know if you guys read this book, but does my product pass the high school embarrassment test? Like, would I be embarrassed to show people from my high school what I built? And right now, maybe not. Like, not too proud of it, like maybe from a user experience standpoint and design standpoint. But I think if users are going to be happy at the end and they're happy enough to say they're going to recommend your product, and I don't know if you guys know what Nps score, but like above an 8, 9, and 10, that's really good, and anything below it, like we look at it on a pretty granular level, not just like, I don't know if you're familiar with Nps, but it's like a cumulative score, but I'd suggest using a tool to actually drill down to the actual user to see what individual users think about your product versus cumulatively.
I've been given clearance for a few more questions if they're questions. Yeah.
You touched about user voice. I think you mentioned user voice. I've been very impressed with the way that Microsoft rolled out their Power BI product. They used a lot of customer feedback. They allowed subscribers to have 5 votes on what features that would be rolled out. You only get 5, so you have to use them wisely, right? And the tally of the votes is shown to everybody so you can ride on somebody else's idea. And these features are developed and they have monthly rollouts, monthly product updates. And if your vote is in that rollout, then you get an email saying, hey, thank you very much for your suggestion. It's been incorporated. Look for it in this month's rollout. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about user voice or that type of customer feedback.
So user voice, if you're unfamiliar with it, it allows you to have, it's a SaaS solution for your product that allows your customers to give you suggestions for new features for your product, and then other customers can come in and upvote those or add comments to those. It doesn't really have, that I'm aware of, I'm not super familiar with all their feature set, but I don't think they have that 5 one where like, let's pick 5. So I think it's more just gross voting. And that's why I kind of don't love it as much, because I think you do need some constraint. And it's not just everything can be, is equal. So that would be what I think is, a little bit of the downfall of it. I like how Microsoft probably approached that with just give me 5. I think that's really valuable, and you constrain it, because that's really what the problem is you have constraints on your side as well. Does that answer your question?
Okay, I lied. There was only one more question. So the speakers will all be here. If you have questions for them, make sure and follow the continuing conversation on productstack.com. There's also the Slack channel, so folks are available there to continue the conversation. But I encourage you, if you have questions, come on up and ask the speakers. So if I could get a round of applause for all the panelists. Thank you very much.
And a round of applause for Rick, please, also for his time. We're asking 2 or 3 questions. Yeah, please stick around. The panelists we forced them to stick around for another half an hour at least. So please corner them, grab a drink. There's some more beer and food left over. And yes, questions that weren't answered, please ask them in person.